Her first kiss was stolen at gunpoint on a desert road, but the cowboy who saved her that day would teach her that love isn't taken, it's given. If you want to know how a moment of terror became a lifetime of devotion, stay with me until the very end. And don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. The desert didn't care about fear. It stretched endlessly in every direction, indifferent to the prayers whispered inside the rattling stagecoach that carved its way through Arizona territory. Eliza Hart pressed her gloved hands against her lap, fingers trembling despite her best efforts to appear composed. The other passengers, a portly merchant who snored against the window, an older woman clutching a carpet bag, and a silent man in a dark coat, seemed unbothered by the oppressive heat and the monotonous creaking of wheels against hardpan earth. But Eliza felt every jolt, every shift in the wind. She'd left Boston 3 weeks ago with a single trunk, a teaching contract, and a heart full of carefully cultivated hope. The West was supposed to be her fresh start, a place where her quiet nature wouldn't be seen as weakness, where the whispers about her family's financial collapse wouldn't follow her into classrooms and church socials. She imagined herself standing before rows of eager children, teaching them grammar and arithmetic, building something meaningful from nothing. She hadn't imagined this: the suffocating dust, the endless vulnerability of open country, the way civilization seemed to thin with every passing mile until it felt like only a rumor. The driver's shout shattered her thoughts. "Riders coming fast from the east!" Eliza's heart seized. She turned toward the window, and through the dust-smeared glass she saw them, 3 horsemen converging on the stagecoach like wolves on wounded prey. They wore bandanas across their faces, hats pulled low, rifles glinting in the brutal afternoon sun. The merchant jerked awake with a snort. "What in blazes? Outlaws!" the man in the dark coat said flatly. His hand moved toward his waistband, but the older woman grabbed his wrist. "Don't!" she hissed. "They'll kill us all." The stagecoach lurched as the driver tried to coax more speed from the exhausted horses, but it was futile. Within seconds, the riders had closed the distance. A gunshot cracked the air, a warning, not aimed to kill, and the coach shuddered to a halt so abruptly that Eliza was thrown against the seat in front of her. "Everybody out! Now!" The voice was rough, edged with the kind of casual violence that came from a life where human decency had long ago been discarded. Eliza's hands shook as she reached for the door handle. The older woman was already climbing down, her face pale but stoic. The merchant stumbled out, hands raised, babbling about cooperation and mercy. Eliza's shoes touched the dirt road, and the heat hit her like a physical blow. The sun pressed down mercilessly, turning the landscape into a shimmering haze. She could barely breathe. The 3 outlaws had dismounted. One held the horses. Another kept his rifle trained on the driver, who sat frozen on his bench, hands visible and empty. The third, the leader, she assumed, from the way he moved with predatory confidence, strode directly toward the passengers. "Line up, all of you. Hands where I can see 'em." They obeyed. Eliza found herself standing between the merchant and the older woman, her whole body rigid with terror. She kept her eyes down, staring at the scuffed toes of her traveling boots, trying to make herself invisible. It didn't work. "Well, well," the outlaw's voice changed, took on a different quality. Eliza heard his boots crunch closer. "Looks like we got ourselves a genuine Eastern lady." She didn't look up, couldn't. "I said, look at me, darlin'." A rough hand grabbed her chin, forcing her face upward. Eliza's vision blurred with tears, but she could see him clearly enough, cold eyes above the bandana, a scar cutting through one eyebrow, the smell of whiskey and sweat rolling off him in waves. "Pretty thing," he murmured, almost to himself. "Real pretty." "Please," Eliza whispered. "Take whatever you want. Just please." "Oh, I intend to." His grip tightened. "But money ain't all a man needs out here in the wild country." The merchant started to protest, and the rifle swung toward him with lethal speed. "Shut your mouth, fat man, unless you want a bullet in it." Silence fell like a stone. The outlaw turned back to Eliza, and his free hand came up to pull the bandana down from his face. She saw stained teeth, lips twisted in something between a smile and a sneer. "You ever been kissed, sweetheart?" Eliza's mind went blank with panic. She tried to pull away, but his hand on her chin became iron, holding her in place. "I asked you a question." "No," she choked out. "No, I haven't." "Well then." His voice dropped to something obscene in its false tenderness. "Seems a shame for a girl as pretty as you to go through life not knowing what it feels like. Consider this a gift." She tried to scream, but terror had closed her throat. His face came closer, blocking out the sun, and then his mouth was on hers, hard, brutal, reeking of tobacco and cruelty. It lasted only seconds, but those seconds stretched into an eternity of violation, of helplessness, of something fundamental being ripped away from her. When he finally pulled back, Eliza couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The world had narrowed to the taste of ash on her lips and the sound of the outlaw's laughter. "There now," he said, releasing her so abruptly that she staggered. "That wasn't so." The rifle shot came from nowhere and everywhere at once. The outlaw's hat flew off his head, carried by a bullet that had passed so close to his skull that he dropped to the ground on pure instinct. His companions spun toward the source of the shot, weapons raised, but froze when they saw the lone rider on the ridge above them. Even through her shock, Eliza saw him clearly, a man on a bay horse, silhouetted against the harsh blue sky, a rifle still raised to his shoulder. He sat perfectly still, a statue carved from shadow and danger. "Next one goes through your head, Deacon," the voice carried across the distance, calm and absolutely certain. "Not past it. Through it." The outlaw, Deacon, slowly got to his feet, hands rising in surrender. "Mercer, should have known you'd stick your nose in. Should have known better than to stop a stage on my rote." The rider nudged his horse forward, beginning a careful descent down the rocky slope. "Tell your boys to drop their weapons. Do it slow. You're one man, Mercer. We're three. And I'm the one with the high ground and a Winchester. Your arithmetic's poor, Deacon, but I don't figure it's that poor." The rifle never wavered. "Guns down, now!" For a long moment, nothing happened. Eliza could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the older woman trembling beside her. The merchant had gone completely silent, barely breathing. Then, slowly, the other two outlaws lowered their rifles and let them fall to the dust. "Smart," the man called Mercer said. He was closer now, and Eliza could see more details. The deputy's star pinned to his vest, the way he moved with his horse like they were a single creature, the weathered calm in his face that spoke of a man who'd seen violence and wasn't impressed by it anymore. He kept the rifle trained on Deacon as he dismounted in one fluid motion. "Kick those guns over here, all of you." They complied. The weapons skittered across the dirt, and Mercer collected them with quick efficiency, slinging them over his saddle without ever fully taking his attention off the outlaws. "Now the sidearms, real careful." More guns joined the pile. Deacon's face had gone dark with rage, but he unbuckled his gun belt and tossed it down with the others. "Ma'am," Mercer said, finally glancing toward the older woman, "there's rope on my saddle. Would you be kind enough to bring it here?" The woman hurried to obey, clearly grateful to have something to do. She returned with a coil of rope, and Mercer gestured toward Deacon. "Hands behind your back. You other two, face down on the ground." "You're making a mistake, Mercer," Deacon growled as his hands were bound. "My brother's going to hear about this." "Your brother's welcome to discuss it with Judge Brennan when he rides through next month." Mercer's voice held no emotion, just flat certainty. "Until then, you and your friends are going to enjoy the hospitality of Redstone's jail." The other two outlaws were bound and hauled to their feet. Mercer worked with practiced efficiency, checking knots, confiscating one more hidden knife, keeping everything under control with the kind of quiet competence that made resistance seem pointless. Only when all three men were secure did he finally turn his full attention to the passengers. "Anybody hurt?" The merchant found his voice. "No, sir. Thanks to you, Deputy. I thought for certain we were—" "You're fine." Mercer cut him off, not unkindly, then his eyes moved to Eliza. "Ma'am?" She couldn't speak. The moment his gaze landed on her, something broke inside her chest, and she realized she was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering despite the heat. Mercer's expression shifted. Something passed across his face too quick to name, but his voice gentled. "You hurt?" Eliza shook her head, but tears were streaming down her face now, silent and unstoppable. "He didn't—" Mercer stopped himself, seemed to choose different words. "Did he harm you beyond what I saw?" She understood what he was asking and managed to whisper, "No, just what you saw." Something hardened in Mercer's jaw, but he only nodded. "That's still too much. I'm sorry I didn't get here sooner." "You saved us," the older woman said firmly. "Don't apologize for that, Deputy." Mercer acknowledged her with a brief nod, then addressed the driver, who'd finally climbed down from his bench. "Ben, you able to get these folks to Redstone?" "Yes, sir. Horses are spooked but not hurt." "Good. I'll ride ahead with these three. Get them locked up before they cause any more trouble." He glanced back at the passengers. "You should reach town by sundown. Sheriff Cole will want statements from all of you, but that can wait until tomorrow. Get yourselves fed and rested first." He moved to his horse, gathering the reins of the outlaws' mounts as well. Deacon and his men were forced to walk, hands bound, while Mercer led them on horseback. Before he mounted, though, he paused and looked back at Eliza one more time. "Ma'am, I know you've had a hell of a day, but you're safe now. Redstone's a good town, and folks there will look after you." Eliza wanted to thank him, wanted to say something, anything, that would express the gratitude and relief flooding through her, but her voice had abandoned her completely. Mercer seemed to understand. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was both courteous and somehow protective, then swung into his saddle. "Ben, keep your eyes open on the ride in. I don't expect more trouble, but the world's full of surprises." "Will do, Deputy." And then he was gone, riding north with his prisoners in tow, leaving nothing but dust and the retreating sound of hoofbeats. The older woman put a gentle hand on Eliza's shoulder. "Come on, dear, let's get you back in the coach." Eliza let herself be guided, let herself be settled back into her seat like a child. The merchant was talking, something about their remarkable fortune, about the deputy's marksmanship, about how close they'd all come to disaster, but his words washed over her like water, meaningless. All she could think about was the feeling of violation still burning on her lips, and the way the deputy's eyes had held something fierce and protective when he'd looked at her. Her first kiss. Stolen. Poisoned. The stagecoach lurched into motion, and Eliza closed her eyes against the tears that wouldn't stop falling. Checked. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when the scattered buildings of Redstone finally appeared in the distance. Eliza had stopped crying an hour ago, but she felt hollow, scraped clean of everything except exhaustion. The town was smaller than she'd expected. A single main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising above them, corrals and houses spreading out into the desert beyond. But after endless miles of nothing, it looked like sanctuary. The coach rolled to a stop in front of a building marked General Store and Post, and Ben the driver climbed down with a weary grunt. "We're here, folks. I'll see about getting your luggage unloaded." The merchant practically fell out of the coach, already talking about finding the nearest saloon. The older woman, Mrs. Hendricks, Eliza had learned during the quiet ride, gathered her carpetbag and gave Eliza a long look. "You have people here, dear. Someone expecting you." "The schoolhouse?" Eliza managed. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, rusty from disuse. "I'm the new teacher. They're supposed to have quarters prepared." "I'll walk with you to find it. You shouldn't be alone right now." Eliza wanted to refuse, wanted to prove she was fine, capable, not broken by what had happened. But the truth was she desperately didn't want to be alone. So she nodded and accepted Mrs. Hendricks' arm. The street was busy with late afternoon activity. Cowboys leading horses to the livery, women with shopping baskets, a dog sleeping in the shade of the general store's porch. Normal life, continuing as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. They found the schoolhouse easily, a neat white building at the edge of town, with a small cottage beside it that must be the teachers' quarters. A woman was sweeping the schoolhouse steps, and she looked up at their approach with a welcoming smile. "You must be Miss Hart. We've been expecting you." The woman was middle-aged, with kind eyes and capable hands. "I'm Martha Cole, the sheriff's wife. I've been keeping the school ready for your arrival." "Thank you," Eliza said quietly. Martha's smile faded as she took in Eliza's appearance, the tear-stained face, the trembling hands, the way Mrs. Hendricks was practically holding her upright. "What happened?" "Outlaws stopped the stage," Mrs. Hendricks said grimly. "Deputy Mercer ran them off, but not before they frightened us all half to death. This poor girl had the worst of it." Martha's expression turned fierce. "Come inside, both of you. I'll put on tea and you can tell me everything." The cottage was simple but clean, a main room with a small kitchen, a bedroom beyond, everything furnished with plain practicality. Martha settled them at the table and busied herself with the stove, and somehow her brisk competence made it easier for Eliza to find her voice again. She told the story haltingly, leaving out only the most humiliating details. Martha listened in silence, her mouth pressed into a hard line, and when Eliza finished, she poured 3 cups of tea with hands that shook slightly. "Deacon Pierce," she said. "That's who it was, I'd wager. He and his worthless gang have been plaguing this territory for 2 years. My husband's been trying to catch him, but the bastard's slippery as an eel." She caught herself. "Pardon my language." "It's earned," Mrs. Hendricks said dryly. "Luke Mercer brought him in?" Martha's eyebrows rose. "Well, that's something. Luke's been tracking Deacon for months." "Luke?" Eliza repeated before she could stop herself. "Deputy Mercer. He's been with us about a year. Came from Texas, I believe. Quiet man, but there's no one I'd trust more in a bad situation." Martha studied Eliza's face. "He saw what happened to you, didn't he?" Eliza nodded, fresh shame washing through her. "Don't," Martha said sharply. "Whatever you're thinking right now, that it was your fault, that you should have done something differently, stop it. You did nothing wrong. Deacon Pierce is an animal, and what he did to you was an act of violence, same as if he'd struck you with his fist. You understand me?" Eliza's voice broke. "It was my first—" She couldn't finish, but Martha understood. Her face softened with a pain that looked personal. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." They sat in silence for a moment, drinking tea that tasted like dust and comfort in equal measure. Outside, the light was fading toward evening, painting the desert in shades of amber and shadow. "You should rest," Martha said finally. "There's food in the pantry, and I'll have my husband stop by tomorrow to take your statement, but tonight you just rest." Mrs. Hendricks stood. "I should find the boarding house. But Miss Hart, Eliza, if you need anything, you send word, you hear?" "Thank you," Eliza whispered, "for everything." After they left, Eliza stood alone in the cottage that was supposed to be her new beginning. Her trunk had been delivered and sat unopened near the door. The room was growing dark, but she couldn't seem to make herself light a lamp. Instead, she walked to the small window and looked out at the town settling into night. Somewhere out there, the deputy, Luke Mercer, was probably locking Deacon Pierce and his men behind bars. Somewhere out there, justice was being served, order restored. But inside Eliza's chest, nothing felt orderly. Nothing felt just. She touched her lips with trembling fingers and felt tears sting her eyes again. Her first kiss. Gone. Stolen by a man who saw her as nothing more than an object to be used and discarded. The worst part wasn't even the kiss itself. It was the knowledge that something precious had been taken from her, something she could never get back. Whatever that first kiss was supposed to mean, whatever joy or tenderness or anticipation should have accompanied it, all of that was gone, replaced by fear and violation and the taste of tobacco. Eliza sank down onto the bed without bothering to undress. She pulled the quilt around her shoulders and stared at the darkening ceiling until exhaustion finally pulled her under into restless, dream-haunted sleep. She woke before dawn, disoriented and aching. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back with sickening clarity. Arizona, Redstone. The stage. Deacon Pierce's hands on her face, his mouth crushing hers. Eliza rolled out of bed and barely made it to the wash basin before she was sick. When the retching finally stopped, she stood on shaking legs and caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the basin. She looked like a ghost, pale, hollow-eyed, her hair in disarray, her traveling dress wrinkled and dust-stained. This was not how she'd imagined beginning her new life. But the sun was rising whether she was ready or not, and Eliza had never been the kind of woman who could hide from her responsibilities. So she forced herself through the motions of washing, changing into a fresh dress, pinning up her hair with numb fingers. By the time full daylight streamed through the windows, she was seated at the small table with a cup of coffee, trying to convince herself to eat a piece of bread. The knock at the door made her jump so hard she spilled the coffee. "Miss Hart? It's Martha Cole." Eliza's hand steadied slightly. She opened the door to find Martha on the step. carrying a covered basket and wearing a determined expression. "I brought breakfast," Martha announced, sweeping past her into the cottage. "And before you say you're not hungry, I don't want to hear it. You need to eat." She unpacked the basket with brisk efficiency: eggs, bacon, fresh biscuits, butter, jam. The smell made Eliza's stomach turn, but Martha's expression brooked no argument. "Sit, eat. I'll talk while you do." Eliza sat. "My husband came by the jail this morning," Martha said, pouring more coffee. "Deputy Mercer has Deacon and his men locked up tight. They'll be held until the circuit judge comes through. Should be about 3 weeks. In the meantime, Luke's been asking after you." Eliza's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Asking after me?" "Wanted to know if you were settled, if you needed anything. I told him you were resting." Martha's eyes were shrewd. "He's a good man, Eliza, one of the best I've known. If you're worried about what he thinks of you after what happened, I'm not," Eliza lied. "Liar." But Martha's voice was gentle. "Listen to me. Luke Mercer is the kind of man who sees a woman in trouble and thinks about how to help, not how to judge. He's not like Deacon Pierce. He's not like most men out here, truth be told." Eliza managed to swallow a bite of eggs. They tasted like nothing. "The school term starts in 2 weeks," Martha continued. "I know that seems impossible right now, but you'll be ready. This town needs a good teacher, and from what your letters said, you're more than qualified." I don't know if I can," Eliza's voice cracked. "I don't know if I can stand in front of children and pretend everything's fine when I feel like something inside me is broken." Martha reached across the table and gripped her hand hard. "Then don't pretend. Feel what you're feeling. Be angry, be scared, be whatever you need to be. But don't let Deacon Pierce steal your future along with that kiss." Her eyes blazed with fierce conviction. "You're stronger than you think, Eliza Hart, and you've got a whole town ready to stand behind you while you figure that out." Eliza wanted to believe her, but all she could feel was the weight of shame pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. "The sheriff will need to speak with you today," Martha said more gently. "Get your statement for the trial. Would you like me to be there?" "Yes," Eliza whispered. "Please." "Then I will be. We'll get through this, honey, one day at a time." After Martha left, Eliza forced herself to finish the breakfast, then spent the morning unpacking her trunk. The familiar belongings, her books, her few dresses, the quilt her mother had made, felt like relics from another life, one where she'd been whole and hopeful. The sheriff came at noon. He was an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes, and he took her statement with patient thoroughness, writing down every detail in careful script. Martha sat beside her the entire time, a silent anchor keeping her from floating away into panic. When it was done, the sheriff put his notebook away and looked at her directly. "Miss Hart, I want you to know that Deacon Pierce will pay for what he did. Not just the robbery, all of it. What he did to you was assault, and I'll make damn sure the judge knows it." "Thank you," Eliza managed. "And if you need anything at all, you come find me or Martha or Deputy Mercer. You're not alone in this town." After he left, Eliza stood at the window and watched the street outside. Normal life continued, people going about their business, horses and wagons moving past, children playing in the dust. She wondered if she'd ever feel normal again. Done. 3 days passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Eliza stayed mostly in the cottage, venturing out only when Martha came to walk with her or when she needed supplies from the general store. People were kind, almost painfully so, but she could see the knowledge in their eyes, the way they looked at her with pity and curiosity. The whole town knew what had happened. Of course they did. In a place this small, secrets were impossible. On the 4th morning, she was sitting on her small porch with a book she couldn't focus on when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She looked up to see a rider coming down the street, and her heart seized with recognition even before she could make out his features. Deputy Luke Mercer sat tall in the saddle, his bay horse moving at an easy walk. He wore the same weathered clothes she remembered, the same badge on his vest, the same quiet confidence in his bearing. He saw her and changed direction, guiding his horse toward the cottage. Eliza stood automatically, her book tumbling forgotten to the porch boards. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Mercer stopped a respectful distance away and touched his hat. "Miss Hart, I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No, Her voice came out too high. She cleared her throat. "No, Deputy, you're not disturbing me." He dismounted in that same fluid motion she remembered, but instead of approaching, he stayed by his horse's head, giving her space. "I wanted to check on you," he said simply. "See how you're settling in." I'm fine. Thank you, and thank you for what you did. On the stage. I never properly thanked you." "No thanks needed, ma'am. Just doing my job." But it wasn't just his job, and they both knew it. The way he'd looked at her that day, the gentleness in his voice when he'd asked if she was hurt, that had been more than duty. An awkward silence stretched between them. Eliza didn't know what to say, and Mercer seemed content to wait, his eyes steady on her face but not demanding. Finally, he spoke again. "Martha tells me you'll be starting at the school soon." "Yes, 2 weeks. The kids will be lucky to have you." "You don't know that." The words came out sharper than she intended. "You don't know anything about me." Mercer's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, understanding maybe, or recognition of pain. "You're right," he said quietly. "I don't. But I know you got on that stage and traveled halfway across the country to teach children in a town you'd never seen. That takes courage. Or desperation. Maybe both." A hint of a smile touched his mouth. "Most good things out here come from both." Eliza found herself staring at him, really looking for the first time. He wasn't young, somewhere in his 30s, she guessed, with lines around his eyes that spoke of sun and squinting at horizons. His face was lean and weathered, not handsome in any conventional sense, but there was something compelling about the steadiness in it, the sense of a man who knew exactly who he was and didn't need to prove it to anyone. "I should let you get back to your day," Mercer said, breaking the spell. He gathered his reins, preparing to mount. "But if you need anything, Miss Hart, anything at all, the sheriff's office is just down the street, or you can leave word at the livery. I check there most days." "Thank you," Eliza said softly. "I'll remember that." He nodded, started to turn away, then paused. When he looked back at her, his expression had shifted into something more serious. "What Deacon did to you." He stopped, seemed to choose his words carefully. "That wasn't your fault, and it doesn't define you. I know that probably doesn't help much right now, but I wanted you to hear it anyway." Before Eliza could respond, before she could process the sudden sting of tears in her eyes, he'd swung into the saddle and was riding away, back toward the center of town. She stood on the porch long after he'd disappeared from view, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Luke Mercer. The man who'd saved her. The first person in this new life to see her not as a victim, but as something more. For the first time since that terrible day on the stage, Eliza felt the faintest stirring of something that wasn't fear or shame. It felt almost like hope, and that, more than anything, terrified her. The 2 weeks before school started passed in a slow transformation that Eliza barely noticed happening. Each morning, she woke with the same knot of dread in her stomach, the same phantom taste of violation on her lips. But each day, she forced herself to take one more step back toward the living world. Martha came by every afternoon with some excuse, bringing fresh bread, asking advice about a recipe, inviting Eliza to walk to the general store. Eliza knew what the older woman was doing, and she was grateful for it even when the gratitude felt like another weight to carry. On the 5th day, Martha brought her to meet some of the other women in town. They gathered in the back room of the general store, supposedly to plan the church social scheduled for the following month, but Eliza suspected the real purpose was to welcome her and assess whether she was fit to teach their children. "This is Eliza Hart, our new school teacher," Martha announced to the assembled group. "Eliza, this is Sarah Mackenzie, Grace Peterson, and Alice Wheeler. You'll meet more of us as time goes on, but these ladies run most things worth running in Redstone." The 3 women greeted her with varying degrees of warmth. Sarah, a young mother with tired eyes, seemed genuinely pleased. Grace, older and sharper, studied Eliza like she was evaluating livestock. Alice, somewhere in between, offered a cautious smile. "We heard about your trouble on the stage," Sarah said softly. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that." Thank you, Eliza managed, bracing herself for the pity or the questions. But Grace cut through the awkwardness with characteristic bluntness. Well, at least Luke Mercer was there to put a stop to it. That man's the best thing to happen to this town's law enforcement in years. My husband says he's got the instincts of a hunting cat and the patience of a saint. He certainly seemed very capable, Eliza said carefully. Capable, Grace snorted. That's one word for it. I'd say he's the kind of man who sees what needs doing and does it, without waiting for permission or applause. We could use more like him. Is he married? Alice asked suddenly, then colored when everyone looked at her. I only asked because my cousin's coming to visit next month, and I thought, he's not, Martha said, shooting Alice a look that clearly meant, drop it. And he's not interested, from what I can tell. Luke keeps to himself mostly. Shame, Alice muttered. Man like that shouldn't be alone. The conversation moved on to other topics, the church social, someone's daughter's upcoming wedding, the price of fabric at the general store, and Eliza found herself relaxing slightly. These women weren't treating her like broken glass. They acknowledged what had happened and then moved forward, including her in their world as if she had every right to be part of it. When the gathering broke up an hour later, Sarah caught Eliza's arm at the door. I have 3 children who will be in your class, she said quietly, 2 boys and a girl. They're good kids, but they're full of energy. If you need any help getting the schoolhouse ready, I'd be happy to come by. I'd appreciate that, Eliza said, surprised by how much she meant it. Tomorrow morning, then. Around 9? Perfect. As Eliza walked back to the cottage with Martha, she felt something loosening in her chest, just a fraction. They're good women, Martha said, as if reading her thoughts. A bit nosy, a bit opinionated, but their hearts are in the right place. Thank you for introducing me. You're part of this town now, Eliza. Might as well get to know the people in it. Martha paused at the corner where their paths diverged. And for what it's worth, I think you're going to do just fine here. That night, Eliza slept without nightmares for the first time since the attack. The next morning, Sarah arrived exactly at 9 with her 3 children in tow. The boys, twins of about 8, immediately began racing around the empty schoolroom, while their younger sister clung to her mother's skirt and stared at Eliza with enormous brown eyes. Tommy, James, stop that right now, Sarah commanded, but there was affection in her exasperation. I'm sorry, Miss Hart. They've been cooped up all summer. It's fine, Eliza said, and was surprised to find she meant it. The boy's energy was chaotic but innocent, filling the space with life. There's plenty of room to run. Sarah had brought cleaning supplies and a practiced efficiency that made short work of the dust that had accumulated over the summer months. As they worked, she talked about the town, the families, the quirks Eliza should know about. The Hendersons have 6 children, all hellions, but they're smart as whips if you can keep them focused. The Chang family runs the laundry. Their daughter May is quiet, but she reads better than most adults. The Callahan boy lost his father last winter, so he's been helping his mother run their ranch. He might fall asleep in class sometimes, but don't take it personal. Eliza absorbed it all, grateful for the insight. By the time they finished, the schoolroom gleamed and Eliza had pages of mental notes about the students she'd soon be teaching. Thank you, she told Sarah as the other woman gathered her children. I couldn't have done this alone. You're not alone, Sarah said simply. None of us are, not in a town like this. We take care of each other. After they left, Eliza stood in the empty schoolroom and let herself imagine it full of children, full of purpose. Maybe she could do this. Maybe she could build something here worth building. She was arranging textbooks on the shelves when she heard boots on the porch steps. She turned to find Deputy Mercer standing in the doorway, hat in hand, his tall frame backlit by the afternoon sun. Deputy, she said, her heart doing that strange skip again. Can I help you? Just making rounds, he said, but his eyes were scanning the room, taking in the clean floors and organized shelves. Place looks good. Mrs. Mackenzie helped this morning. Sarah's good people. He hesitated, then stepped inside, his movements careful as if he was conscious of not crowding her. I wanted to let you know, the judge confirmed he'll be here in 2 weeks. Deacon and his men will stand trial. Eliza's hands tightened on the book she was holding. Will I need to testify? Probably, if you're willing. His eyes held hers steadily. I know that's asking a lot. I'll do it. The words came out stronger than she felt. He should pay for what he did. He will. There was absolute certainty in Mercer's voice. I'll make sure of it. They stood in silence for a moment, and Eliza found herself studying him again, the way he held himself, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him without effort. Can I ask you something? The words were out before she could stop them. Of course. Why did you become a lawman? Mercer's expression shifted, became more guarded. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he moved to the window, looking out at the street beyond. My sister, he said finally. She was about your age when a man hurt her, badly, and there was no law where we lived, no one to make him answer for it. By the time I was old enough to do something about it, she was already gone. Died of pneumonia, but I always thought it was more that she'd lost the will to keep fighting. Eliza felt her throat tighten. I'm so sorry. It was a long time ago, but the pain in his voice was fresh. I decided then that if I could stop even one man like that, if I could help even one person the way no one helped her, it'd be worth whatever it cost me. That's why you came out here. That's why I went everywhere, Texas, New Mexico, now Arizona, following the work, I suppose, following the need. He turned back to her. Your testimony will help put Deacon away for a long time. But if it's too much, if you can't face him again, I'll understand. No, Eliza lifted her chin. I'll testify. He doesn't get to make me afraid forever. Something like approval flickered across Mercer's face. You're stronger than you think, Miss Hart. People keep telling me that. I'm still waiting to feel it. Strength isn't something you feel, it's something you do, even when you're terrified. He settled his hat back on his head. You're already doing it. After he left, Eliza stood alone in the schoolroom and realized her hands had stopped shaking. She thought about his sister, about all the women who'd been hurt, and had no one to help them, no one to believe them, no one to make their attackers pay. She thought about Luke Mercer spending his life trying to be the help that never came, and she understood with sudden clarity why his steady presence made her feel safer than she'd felt since stepping off that stagecoach. The days blurred together after that. Eliza threw herself into preparing for school, organizing lessons and materials with an intensity that left little room for fear or shame. When the nightmares came, and they still came, more nights than not, she forced herself out of bed and lit a lamp and read until exhaustion pulled her back under. She saw Mercer occasionally on his rounds, always at a distance, always respectful. Sometimes they exchanged nods or brief greetings. Once he helped her carry a heavy box of supplies from the general store to the schoolhouse, and they walked in comfortable silence that felt like its own kind of conversation. The women of the town continued to draw her into their circle. She attended the Sunday service not because she felt particularly devout, but because it seemed expected, and because Martha's pointed looks left little room for refusal. Afterward, she was invited to Sunday dinner at the Cole household, where the sheriff proved to be as kind as his wife, and their 2 teenage sons treated her with awkward courtesy. You settling in all right? Sheriff Cole asked over roast chicken. Yes, thank you. Everyone's been very welcoming. Good. That's good. He exchanged a glance with Martha. I know the trial's coming up. If you need anything, support, someone to accompany you to the courthouse, you just let us know. I will. Luke says you're planning to testify. Eliza nodded, her appetite fading. That takes guts, the sheriff said quietly. Facing down a man like Deacon Pierce, you should know the whole town's behind you on this. The praise felt undeserved, but Eliza accepted it with what grace she could manage. After dinner, Martha showed her the garden while the men cleaned up inside, and they talked about inconsequential things, the best time to plant tomatoes, whether the summer heat would break soon, the latest gossip about the banker's son courting the hotel owner's daughter. It was so normal, it almost hurt. On the Saturday before school started, Martha appeared at Eliza's door with an announcement. There's a town social tonight. Dancing, food, general socializing. You're coming. Oh, I don't think... Wasn't a question, honey. You need to meet more people, and people need to see you're not going to hide away forever. Besides, it'll be fun. Eliza doubted that, but she also knew better than to argue with Martha when she had that particular look in her eyes. So that evening, she found herself in her best dress, a simple blue cotton that had survived the journey relatively unwrinkled, walking beside Martha toward the large barn at the edge of town where the social was being held. The sound of fiddle music drifted across the evening air, and lanterns glowed warm against the gathering dusk. People were streaming in from all directions, dressed in their finest, talking and laughing with the easy familiarity of neighbors who'd known each other for years. Eliza's stomach knotted with anxiety. This was different from meeting women in small groups or attending church. This was the whole town, all at once, and she'd be on display whether she wanted to be or not. "Breathe," Martha murmured. "You'll be fine. Just smile and be yourself." Inside the barn, tables laden with food lined one wall, while musicians tuned their instruments on a makeshift stage. Children raced between adults' legs, and couples were already forming up for the first dance. The air smelled of hay and perfume and something baking. Sarah Mackenzie spotted them immediately and hurried over with her husband in tow. "Eliza, I'm so glad you came. This is my husband, William. Will, this is Miss Hart, the new teacher." William was a solid man with a carpenter's hands and a shy smile. "Pleasure to meet you, ma'am. Sarah says you got the schoolroom looking better than it has in years." "She did most of the work," Eliza protested. "Don't sell yourself short," Sarah said. "Now come on, let me introduce you to some more folks." The next hour passed in a blur of names and faces. Eliza met ranchers and shopkeepers, cowboys and craftsmen, more children than she could possibly remember. Most people were kind, some were curious, a few were clearly reserving judgment, but no one mentioned the stagecoach or Deacon Pierce, and for that she was grateful. The dancing started in earnest as full darkness fell. Eliza found a seat along the wall, content to watch, but she'd barely settled when a young cowboy appeared in front of her, hat in hand and face red with nervousness. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but would you care to dance?" Eliza's first instinct was to refuse, but something in his earnest expression stopped her. He was barely old enough to shave, probably working up every ounce of courage he had just to ask. "I should warn you I'm not very good," she said, standing. His face lit up. "That's all right, ma'am. Neither am I." He led her onto the floor with endearing clumsiness, and they joined the other couples in a simple reel. Eliza stumbled through it, concentrating hard on the steps, trying to ignore the eyes she could feel on her. The boy, he said his name was Danny, kept apologizing every time he stepped on her toes until she couldn't help but laugh. "It's fine," she assured him. "Really, I've stepped on your feet just as much." When the dance ended, Danny thanked her profusely and disappeared back into the crowd, probably to boast to his friends. Eliza returned to her seat, slightly out of breath but feeling oddly pleased. "You looked like you were enjoying yourself," Martha said, appearing with 2 cups of punch. "I was, actually." Eliza accepted the punch gratefully. "That was easier than I expected." "Told you, nothing to be afraid of here." But then Eliza's gaze snagged on a figure standing near the barn entrance, and her breath caught. Luke Mercer leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching the festivities with the same quiet observation he brought to everything. He'd cleaned up for the occasion. Fresh shirt, newer pants, hair still damp from washing, but he still carried himself with that same self-contained stillness. Martha followed her gaze and smiled. "Luke usually stops by these things but never stays long. Doesn't dance, doesn't really mingle, just watches over things, making sure everyone stays safe." "Always on duty?" "More or less." Martha studied Eliza's face with knowing eyes. "You could go talk to him, you know. He doesn't bite." "I know, I just—" Eliza stopped, not sure how to explain the complicated tangle of feelings that arose whenever she saw the deputy. Gratitude, yes, but also something else, something that made her pulse quicken and her palms sweat. "Take your time, honey. There's no rush." But before Eliza could decide what to do, Grace Peterson descended on them with the determined air of a woman on a mission. "Martha, I need your opinion on the pie contest judging. There's a dispute about whether Alice's apple pie counts if she used store-bought crust." She glanced at Eliza. "Miss Hart, you should come too. We need all the rational voices we can get." Martha rolled her eyes but stood. "Lord save us from small-town politics. Come on, Eliza. This should be entertaining if nothing else." The pie dispute was resolved eventually. Alice's pie was allowed to compete but placed in a separate category. And by the time Eliza returned to the main area, the musicians had started a slower song. Couples swayed together in the lamplight, and the atmosphere had shifted into something softer, more romantic. Eliza was heading back to her seat when a shadow fell across her path. She looked up to find Luke Mercer standing there, his expression unreadable. "Miss Hart." He inclined his head slightly. "You look like you're having a good evening." "I am, surprisingly." She smiled tentatively. "Are you enjoying yourself, Deputy?" "I don't usually come to these things for enjoyment, more for—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Peace of mind, I suppose. Making sure everything stays peaceful." "Does trouble often break out at town socials?" "Not often, but when it does, it tends to involve too much whiskey and too little sense." His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, not quite a smile, but close. "So far tonight, everyone's behaving." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Around them, couples moved past toward the dance floor, and Eliza became acutely aware of how close Mercer was standing, how tall he seemed, how the lamplight caught in his dark eyes. "Would you—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "Would you like to dance?" Eliza's heart jumped. She stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You don't have to," he said quickly, misreading her silence. "I know I'm not much for socializing, and you probably have better—" "Yes," Eliza interrupted. "I'd like that." Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something that might have been relief. He offered his hand with grave courtesy, and Eliza placed hers in it, feeling the calluses, the strength, the unexpected gentleness of his grip. He led her onto the floor and turned to face her, one hand settling lightly at her waist, the other still holding hers. Eliza's other hand came up to rest on his shoulder, and she was suddenly intensely aware of every point of contact between them. "I should warn you," Mercer said as they began to move. "I'm not what you'd call an expert dancer." "That seems to be a common theme tonight." "I'm not either." But he moved with the same controlled grace he brought to everything else, guiding her through the steps with quiet confidence. Eliza found herself relaxing into it, following his lead, letting the music carry them. "Martha says the school opens Monday," he said after a moment. "Yes. I'm nervous." "You'll do fine. Everyone keeps saying that." "Because it's true." He met her eyes directly. "You've got the education, the preparation, and the courage to be here in the first place. That's more than most people bring to anything." "You sound very certain." "I'm certain about what I've seen. You've been through something terrible, and you're still here, still moving forward, still planning to stand in front of those children and teach them. That takes more strength than most people ever have to find." Eliza felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You keep saying things like that." "Like what?" "Things that make me feel like maybe I'm not as broken as I think I am." Mercer's hand tightened fractionally at her waist. "You're not broken, Miss Hart. You're hurt. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Broken things can't heal. But hurt can mend, given time and care." His voice dropped lower, intimate despite the crowded room. "You're already mending. I can see it." Eliza wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But the fear was still there, the shame still lurking in the quiet moments. As if sensing her doubt, Mercer continued softly, "After my sister died, I spent years thinking I was broken too. Thought the anger and guilt would eat me alive. But eventually I learned that carrying pain doesn't make you broken. Sometimes it just makes you human." "What changed?" Eliza asked. "How did you move past it?" "I'm not sure I have entirely, but I found purpose in it, made it mean something by trying to help others." He paused. "Maybe that's not moving past it. Maybe it's just learning to carry it differently." The song was ending, other couples beginning to separate, but neither Eliza nor Mercer moved. They stood there in the middle of the floor, hands still joined, and Eliza felt something shift inside her chest, something warm and fragile and terrifying. "Thank you," she whispered. "For the dance. For everything." "Any time, Miss Hart." He released her then, stepped back, and the loss of his warmth felt physical. Eliza watched him disappear back into the crowd, her hand still tingling where he'd held it. Martha appeared at her elbow, smirking. Well, Luke Mercer dancing. I haven't seen that in the entire year he's been here." "It was just a dance," Eliza said, but her voice sounded unconvincing even to her own ears. Just a dance. Martha's eyes sparkled with amusement. You keep telling yourself that, honey. The rest of the evening passed in a pleasant haze. Eliza danced twice more, once with Sheriff Cole and once with Sarah's husband, William, but her attention kept drifting to the quiet figure by the door, watching over everyone with patient vigilance. When the social finally wound down near midnight, Martha offered to walk her home, but Eliza found herself scanning the dispersing crowd for someone else. Looking for anyone in particular? Martha asked innocently. Before Eliza could answer, Luke Mercer materialized out of the darkness, leading his horse. I'm heading that direction anyway, he said without preamble. Be happy to walk you home, Miss Hart, if that's all right with you. Eliza's heart fluttered. That would be very kind. Thank you. Martha's expression was smug, but she kept her thoughts to herself. I'll see you tomorrow at church then, Eliza. Good night, Luke. Ma'am? He tipped his hat. They walked in silence for the first block, Mercer's horse plodding patiently behind them. The night was cool and clear, stars blazing overhead in the way they never did back east. Eliza could hear music still drifting from the barn, laughter from groups heading home, the distant yip of a coyote. It's beautiful here, she said softly. Different from Boston, but beautiful in its own way. You miss it? Boston? Sometimes. The familiar parts. But I don't miss who I was there. She glanced at him. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. Sometimes we need to leave who we were behind to become who we're meant to be. They reached the cottage too soon. Eliza stopped at the porch steps, reluctant for the evening to end. Thank you for walking me home, Deputy. Luke, he said. You can call me Luke, if you're comfortable with that. Luke. She tested the name, found she liked the shape of it. Then you should call me Eliza. Eliza? The way he said it, careful and warm, made something flutter in her chest. Sleep well, and good luck on Monday. You'll be around? In case I need... She stopped, embarrassed. I'm sorry. You have your own duties. I shouldn't... I'll be around, he said firmly. First day is always the hardest, but you won't be alone in it. After he left, Eliza stood on her porch and watched his silhouette disappear into the darkness. Her lips still tingled from smiling. Her hand still remembered the warmth of his. For the first time since arriving in Redstone, she felt something that wasn't fear or shame or anxiety. She felt anticipation, hope, the fragile beginning of trust. And when she finally went inside and lay down to sleep, she dreamed not of Deacon Pierce's violence, but of gentle hands and steady eyes, and the promise of safety that felt almost like it could become something more. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made the desert look almost welcoming. Eliza dressed carefully in her most professional outfit, a gray skirt and white shirtwaist that proclaimed "teacher" without saying a word, and braided her hair into a neat coil at the nape of her neck. Her hands shook as she fastened the buttons, and she had to start over twice before getting them right. The schoolhouse waited across the small yard, its white walls gleaming in the early light. Through the windows she could see the rows of desks she'd arranged so carefully, the chalkboard she'd cleaned until it shone, the books lined up on shelves with mathematical precision. Everything was ready. Everything except her. She forced down 2 bites of toast and half a cup of coffee, then gathered her materials and walked across to unlock the school door. The hinges creaked as she pushed it open, and the smell of chalk dust and old wood enveloped her like a familiar embrace. This, at least, she knew. Teaching, purpose, a reason to be brave. The children began arriving shortly after 8. They came in clusters, siblings walking together, neighbors meeting on the road, a few delivered by parents who wanted to inspect the new teacher personally. Eliza stood on the porch and greeted each one, learning names, shaking small hands, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. Tommy and James Mackenzie arrived in a whirlwind of energy, their little sister Clara clinging to their mother's hand. Sarah gave Eliza an encouraging smile before prying Clara's fingers loose and nudging her toward the schoolhouse steps. You'll be fine, sweetheart. Miss Hart is very nice. Clara looked unconvinced but allowed herself to be ushered inside. By the time the school bell rang at 8:30, Eliza had 23 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old, all seated and staring at her with expressions that ran the gamut from eager to skeptical to openly challenging. She took a deep breath and stepped to the front of the room. "Good morning. My name is Miss Hart, and I'm very pleased to be your new teacher." Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected, and she felt something settle in her chest. This she could do. This was familiar territory, even if everything else in her life had been turned upside down. "I know many of you are wondering what kind of teacher I'll be, so let me tell you. I believe in working hard, treating each other with respect, and remembering that learning should be something we enjoy, not something we endure." A few of the older boys exchanged skeptical glances, but most of the children seemed cautiously receptive. The morning proceeded better than Eliza had dared hope. She divided the students into groups by age and ability, assigned reading to the older ones while she worked with the younger children on their letters, and managed to keep even the most restless boys engaged through a combination of firmness and genuine interest in their questions. At the mid-morning break, she stood on the porch and watched her students scatter across the yard, the girls forming small clusters while the boys immediately organized some kind of chasing game. They looked so normal, so innocent, so untouched by the kinds of darkness that lurked in the adult world. "Seems to be going well." Eliza turned to find Luke standing at the corner of the building, one shoulder propped against the whiteboards, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes warm. "You startled me," she said, pressing a hand to her racing heart. "Sorry, didn't mean to." He gestured toward the children. "They giving you any trouble?" "Not yet, though I suspect the twins are plotting something." Luke's mouth quirked. "Tommy and James, without a doubt. Those two have been raising creative hell since they learned to walk, but they're good kids underneath it. You know them?" "I know most of the families here. Part of the job." He shifted his weight, seemed about to say something else, then stopped. "What?" Eliza prompted. "Nothing, just, you look like you belong here, like you were always meant to be standing on this porch, watching over these kids." The compliment caught her off guard, warming her from the inside. "Thank you. That means more than you know." "I meant it." His eyes held hers for a long moment, and Eliza felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. "I should let you get back to it. Just wanted to check in." "I'm glad you did." After he left, Eliza found herself smiling as she rang the bell to call the children back inside. The afternoon flew by in a blur of arithmetic lessons, history recitations, and one minor crisis when James Mackenzie put a grasshopper down the back of Alice Wheeler's daughter's dress. Eliza handled it with calm authority, separating the offenders and assigning extra reading as punishment, and by the time she dismissed the class at 3 o'clock, she felt genuinely triumphant. She'd done it. First day complete, and no disasters. Sarah appeared as the last students were trickling out. "How did it go?" "Better than I expected. Your boys were energetic but manageable." Sarah laughed. "That's diplomatic. James told me about the grasshopper incident on the way out. I'm sorry about that." "It's fine. Just boys being boys." Eliza began erasing the chalkboard, her muscles pleasantly tired. "I think we'll all survive each other." "I knew you would do wonderfully." Sarah hesitated at the door. "A few of us are meeting at my house tomorrow evening. Nothing formal, just women talking and doing handwork. You should come." "I'd like that." The pattern of her days began to take shape after that. Mornings and afternoons filled with teaching, evenings spent preparing lessons or attending the small social gatherings that seemed to be a constant feature of town life. The women continued to draw her into their circle with patient persistence, and gradually Eliza found herself relaxing into it, finding comfort in the rhythm of conversation and shared tasks. Luke appeared periodically, always with some official reason, checking on the school's security, making his rounds, delivering a message from the sheriff, but his eyes always found hers, and their conversations, brief as they were, became the moments Eliza looked forward to most. A week after school started, Martha cornered her after church with a knowing look. "You and Luke seem to be developing quite the friendship." Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He's been very kind, that's all." "Mm-hmm. Kind. Is that what we're calling it?" Martha's expression softened. "I'm not teasing you, honey. Luke's a good man, and you deserve someone good in your life. I'm just saying if there's something developing there, you shouldn't feel guilty about it." I'm not. Eliza stopped, frustrated by her own incoherence. It's complicated. Most worthwhile things are. Martha squeezed her arm gently. Just don't let fear make your decisions for you. That's all I'm saying. But fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface of Eliza's growing contentment. It manifested in small ways. The way she flinched when someone approached too quickly, the nightmares that still came occasionally, the phantom taste of violation that sometimes ambushed her in quiet moments. And it manifested most powerfully when Sheriff Cole stopped by the schoolhouse one afternoon with news about the trial. Judge Brennan arrives next week, he told her, his expression grave. Deacon and his men will be tried on the 15th. I need to know if you're still willing to testify. Eliza's stomach dropped, but she kept her voice steady. Yes, I'll testify. It won't be easy. His lawyer will try to discredit you, make you seem like you're exaggerating or making things up, and you'll have to face Deacon himself. I understand. The sheriff studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Luke will be there. So will I. You won't be alone in that courtroom. After he left, Eliza sat at her desk and let the fear wash over her. The trial. Facing Deacon Pierce again. Reliving that horrible moment in front of a room full of strangers. She was still sitting there when Luke appeared in the doorway, his expression concerned. Sheriff said he talked to you about the trial. Eliza nodded, not trusting her voice. Luke stepped inside, closing the distance between them but stopping a respectful few feet away. You don't have to do this. No one would think less of you if you decided it was too much. I'd think less of myself. She looked up at him, willing him to understand. He can't just take what he wants and walk away. Someone has to make him answer for it. You're right, but that someone doesn't have to be you. Yes, it does. She stood, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Because if I don't stand up now, if I let fear win, then he's taken more than just a kiss. He's taken my courage, my dignity, my ability to fight back. And I won't give him that. Pride flickered across Luke's face. Then I'll be right there beside you, every second. Promise? Promise. The days until the trial passed too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Eliza threw herself into teaching with renewed intensity, as if keeping busy could keep the fear at bay. The children responded with enthusiasm that both touched and exhausted her, and by the time Friday arrived, she felt wrung out and brittle. That evening, Luke appeared at her cottage with an unexpected invitation. There's a spot about a mile from town, he said, standing on her porch with his hat in his hands. Up in the rocks. Good view of the sunset. I thought maybe you could use some air before next week. Get out of your own head for a bit. Eliza should have said no, should have recognized the intimacy implicit in the offer, the way it crossed from friendship into something more deliberate. But the thought of sitting alone in her cottage, dwelling on the approaching trial, was unbearable. I'd like that, she heard herself say. They rode out together, Eliza on a gentle mare from the livery and Luke on his bay. He led her up a winding trail through the red rocks that surrounded Redstone, climbing higher until the town spread out below them like a child's toy village. At the top, he dismounted and helped her down, his hands steady at her waist, and they stood together looking out at the vast expanse of desert painted gold and crimson by the lowering sun. It's beautiful, Eliza breathed. I come up here sometimes when I need to think, or stop thinking. Luke settled himself on a flat boulder and gestured for her to join him. Helps put things in perspective. All the troubles that seem so big down there, they look smaller from up here. Eliza sat beside him, careful to maintain a respectable distance, and let the peace of the place seep into her bones. The wind whispered through the rocks, carrying the scent of sage and dust. A hawk circled lazily overhead, riding the thermals. Luke, she said after a long silence, can I ask you something personal? Of course. But please. Do you ever stop being afraid? After something terrible happens, after someone hurts you or someone you love, does the fear ever really go away? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, No, not entirely, but it changes. Becomes something you carry instead of something that carries you. Does that make sense? I think so. She picked at a thread on her skirt. I'm afraid of the trial, of seeing him again, of having to say out loud in front of everyone what he did to me. That's natural. But I'm more afraid of what it means if I don't. I'm afraid that if I let fear make me hide, I'll spend the rest of my life hiding from everything, every risk, every chance, every possibility of... She stopped, unable to finish. Of what? Luke's voice was gentle, encouraging. Of ever trusting anyone again. Of ever letting anyone close enough to... Her throat closed around the words. Luke shifted, angling his body slightly toward hers. Eliza, what Deacon did to you, that wasn't about closeness or affection or any of the things that word kiss is supposed to mean. That was violence, power, taking something without permission because he could. I know that intellectually, but it's still there in my head, this association between intimacy and fear. That's what he wanted, to poison it for you, to make you afraid of something that should be gentle and good and chosen. Luke's jaw tightened. Men like him don't just hurt bodies. They try to hurt spirits, confidence, the ability to trust. Then how do I fix it? How do I separate what he did from what it's supposed to be? Luke looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression, something determined and tender at once. Would you trust me to show you? Eliza's heart began to pound. Show me what? What it's supposed to feel like. What a kiss should be when it's freely given, not stolen. When it's about respect and affection instead of power and fear. He held up a hand before she could respond. But only if you want to. Only if you're ready. And you can say no, and it won't change anything between us. I promise you that. Eliza stared at him, her mind racing. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to protect herself, to maintain the safe distance she'd worked so hard to establish. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, a desperate longing to reclaim what had been stolen, to prove that Deacon Pierce hadn't broken her beyond repair. I want to, she whispered, but I'm terrified. I know, that's why we're going to do this your way, at your pace. You're in control of every second. Luke shifted so he was facing her fully, his expression open and patient. First, I'm going to ask permission before I do anything. Is it all right if I move closer? Eliza's breath hitched, but she nodded. Luke slid along the boulder until barely a foot separated them, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the way his throat moved when he swallowed. Is this all right? He asked softly. Yes. Can I take your hand? She extended it, trembling, and his fingers closed around hers, warm, calloused, gentle. He held her hand between both of his, not pulling or demanding, just holding. Remember, he said, his voice low and steady, you can stop this any time. Just say the word, and I'll move back. No questions, no hurt feelings. This is yours to control. I understand. I'm going to touch your face now, just my hand on your cheek. Is that all right? Eliza's heart hammered so hard she thought he must be able to hear it, but she managed to nod. Luke released her hand and slowly, telegraphing every movement, brought his palm up to cup her face. His touch was feather-light, warm, his thumb barely brushing her cheekbone. Nothing like Deacon's brutal grip, nothing like violence. Still all right? He murmured. Yes, she breathed. A real kiss, Eliza, starts with this, with asking, with waiting, with caring more about the other person's comfort than your own wants. His thumb traced a gentle arc along her jaw. A real kiss is offered, not taken, given, not stolen. Does that make sense? Yes. I'd like to kiss you now, but only if you want it to. Do you? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Eliza looked into his eyes and saw nothing but patience and warmth and a quiet strength that made her feel safe in a way she'd forgotten was possible. Yes, she whispered. I want this. Luke leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, to pull away, to stop him. His other hand came up to frame her face, cradling it with infinite gentleness, and then his mouth touched hers with a softness that made her eyes sting with tears. It was nothing like the first time. Nothing like fear and force, and violation. This was warm and careful and achingly tender. Luke kissed her like she was something precious, something to be cherished, his lips moving against hers with patient devotion. He tasted like coffee and peppermint, and the scent of him, leather and sage and something uniquely his own, surrounded her like a protective circle. When he started to pull back, Eliza surprised herself by following, deepening the kiss just a fraction, her hands coming up to grip his shirt. Luke made a soft sound of surprise and approval, but he didn't take control, didn't push for more. He let her set the pace, let her explore, let her discover on her own terms what affection could feel like when it was freely shared. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Luke rested his forehead against hers, his hand still gentle on her face. "That," he said roughly, "is what a kiss is supposed to be." Eliza couldn't speak past the emotion clogging her throat. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't tears of fear or shame. They were release, relief, the shattering realization that Deacon Pierce hadn't ruined her after all. "Thank you," she finally managed to whisper. Luke pulled back just enough to look at her, concern creasing his brow. "Are you all right? Was that too much?" "No." She laughed through her tears, giddy with a strange kind of joy. "It was perfect. Luke, you gave it back to me. The thing he stole. You gave it back." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something fierce and protective. "He never had it, Eliza. He only made you think he did. What just happened between us, this was always yours to give, and you chose to give it. That's the difference." She kissed him again, quick and impulsive, and felt him smile against her mouth. "We should probably head back before it gets full dark," he said reluctantly. "Don't want people talking." "Let them talk." But Eliza stood anyway, suddenly aware of how radically her world had shifted in the span of 20 minutes. The fear was still there, but it no longer felt insurmountable. She'd faced it, kissed a man on her own terms, and survived. More than survived. She'd discovered something beautiful on the other side of terror. They rode back to town in comfortable silence, and when Luke helped her dismount in front of her cottage, his hands lingered at her waist. "The trial is Tuesday," he said quietly. "When you're up there testifying, when you have to face Deacon again, I want you to remember this. Remember that he doesn't have power over you anymore. You've already won." "We've won," Eliza corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. I just reminded you of what was already there." He stepped back, retrieving his hat from where it hung on his saddle. "Get some rest. I'll see you Sunday." After he left, Eliza stood on her porch and touched her lips with wondering fingers. They felt different now, not tainted, not violated, but hers again. Reclaimed. She went inside and lay in her bed, and for the first time since arriving in Redstone, she fell asleep with a smile on her face and no nightmares waiting in the dark. The weekend passed in a strange liminal space between anticipation and dread. Sunday's church service felt interminable. Though Eliza was acutely aware of Luke sitting 3 rows back, his presence a steady comfort, even without words. Afterward, Martha pulled her aside with a speculative look. "You seem different, lighter somehow." "Do I?" Eliza tried for innocence and failed. Wouldn't have anything to do with a certain deputy, would it?" "I don't know what you mean," Martha snorted. "You're a terrible liar, honey, but that's all right. Your secrets are safe with me." Her expression sobered. "Trial's tomorrow. You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be." "Good. Remember, the whole town's behind you. Deacon Pierce might have his lawyer and his swagger, but you've got truth on your side. And that counts for more than people think." Monday arrived with agonizing slowness. Eliza taught her classes by rote, her mind already in the courthouse, already facing the man who'd hurt her. The children sensed her distraction and were quieter than usual, even the twins subdued. When the final bell rang, Luke was waiting outside. "Thought I'd walk you home," he said simply. "Make sure you get some rest before tomorrow." They walked in silence until they reached her cottage, and then Luke turned to face her, his expression serious. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever Deacon's lawyer says or implies, you remember this. You are telling the truth, and the truth matters. It doesn't matter if they try to twist it or diminish it. What happened to you was wrong, and saying so out loud is the bravest thing you can do. What if I freeze? What if I can't get the words out? Then you take a breath, look at me. I'll be right there in the front row, and you try again, as many times as it takes. His hand found hers, squeezed gently. You can do this, Eliza. I know you can. That night, Eliza barely slept. When dawn finally came, she dressed with numb fingers in her most severe outfit, pinned her hair back so tight it hurt, and walked to the courthouse on legs that felt like water. The building was already crowded when she arrived. Martha materialized at her side immediately, linking their arms in a gesture of solidarity. Sheriff Cole appeared a moment later, his face grim but determined. You're doing a good thing today, he told her. Don't forget that. Then Luke was there, his hand warm at the small of her back, guiding her to a seat near the front. He settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and the contact was an anchor in the storm of her anxiety. The courtroom filled rapidly, curious townspeople, witnesses, the other passengers from the stagecoach. And then, with a clank of chains, Deacon Pierce was led in. Eliza's breath stopped in her chest. He looked smaller than she remembered, more ordinary, but the coldness in his eyes when they landed on her was exactly the same. He smiled, slow and cruel, and she felt fear spike through her veins. Luke's hand found hers under cover of her skirt, squeezed hard. Breathe, he murmured. I'm right here, she breathed. The trial proceeded with formal efficiency. The judge, a severe man with steel-gray hair, called the court to order. The prosecutor outlined the charges: robbery, assault, terrorizing passengers, and Deacon's lawyer, a slick man from Tucson, entered a plea of not guilty. Then the witnesses began. The stagecoach driver testified about the robbery. The merchant described being held at gunpoint. Mrs. Hendricks spoke about the fear they'd all felt. And then the prosecutor called Eliza Hart to the stand. Her legs barely supported her as she stood. Luke released her hand reluctantly, and she felt the loss of his warmth like a physical blow. But she walked forward, climbed into the witness box, and placed her hand on the Bible as directed. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. The prosecutor was kind, his questions straightforward. Tell us what happened that day. Describe the defendant's actions. What did he say to you? What did he do? Eliza heard her own voice, distant and mechanical, recounting the nightmare. She kept her eyes fixed on a point just past the prosecutor's shoulder, afraid that if she looked at Deacon, she'd shatter. Then the defense attorney stood, and his smile was all teeth. Miss Hart, you claim my client kissed you against your will. He did. But you admit there was no other physical contact? He didn't strike you, didn't touch you inappropriately in any other way? He grabbed my face, and he kissed me. That was inappropriate enough. A few people in the gallery murmured approval, but the lawyer pressed on. Isn't it possible you're exaggerating the incident? Perhaps my client simply got carried away in the moment, meant no real harm. Rage flooded through Eliza, burning away the fear. She looked directly at Deacon Pierce for the first time, saw the smirk on his face, and something inside her hardened to steel. No, she said clearly. There's no exaggeration. Your client grabbed me, held me against my will, and forced a kiss on me while I was terrified. He did it to demonstrate his power, to humiliate me, to steal something he had no right to take. And the only reason it didn't go further was because Deputy Mercer arrived when he did. The courtroom was utterly silent. The defense attorney tried a few more questions, but Eliza held firm, her voice steady, her testimony unwavering. When he finally dismissed her with obvious frustration, she walked back to her seat with her head high. Luke's eyes shone with pride as she sat down beside him. He didn't say anything, but his hand found hers again and held on tight. The rest of the trial passed in a blur. More witnesses, closing arguments, the judge's stern instructions to the jury. Then they were dismissed while the jury deliberated, and Eliza found herself outside in the sharp sunlight, trembling with reaction. You were magnificent, Martha said fiercely, hugging her. Absolutely magnificent. She's right, the sheriff added. That lawyer didn't know what hit him. But it was Luke's quiet, I'm proud of you, that made tears sting Eliza's eyes. The jury returned in less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. Deacon Pierce was sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison, and as he was led away in chains, he turned one last time to look at Eliza. But this time, his expression held no power over her. This time, she looked back without flinching. She'd won. Not just the trial, but something deeper. The war for her own spirit, her own right to define what had happened to her, and refuse to be diminished by it. As they left the courthouse, Luke caught her elbow gently. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Something I should have said before, but I was waiting for the right time." Eliza turned to face him fully, her heart suddenly racing for entirely different reasons. "What is it?" "I'm falling in love with you, Eliza Hart. Have been since the moment I saw you standing terrified on that road and refusing to break. And I know the timing's probably terrible, and you've got every reason to want to take things slow, but I needed you to know. Whatever happens from here, whatever you decide you want or don't want, you should know that you're loved, completely and without reservation." The words hit her like a wave, knocking the breath from her lungs. She stared at him, at this good, steady, patient man who'd given her back her faith and gentleness, and felt something bloom in her chest, something warm and bright and terrifyingly hopeful. "Luke," she whispered, "I think I'm falling in love with you too." His face transformed, joy breaking across it like sunrise, and then he was pulling her into his arms right there on the courthouse steps, holding her like she was something infinitely precious. "Can I kiss you?" he murmured against her hair. "Please." And he did, soft and sweet and full of promise, while the town of Redstone looked on with approving smiles, and Martha Cole announced loudly that it was about damn time. When Eliza woke the morning after the trial, the world felt different, lighter. The weight she'd been carrying since that terrible day on the stagecoach had lifted just enough that she could breathe deeply for the first time in weeks. She lay in bed watching the sunrise paint her ceiling in shades of gold and pink, and allowed herself to feel something she'd almost forgotten existed: happiness. Luke had walked her home the previous evening after the impromptu celebration at the saloon, where half the town had insisted on buying her drinks she barely touched and thanking her for her courage. At her door, he'd kissed her again, slow and thorough, then pulled back with visible reluctance. "I have early patrol tomorrow," he'd said, his forehead resting against hers. "But can I see you tomorrow evening? Take you to dinner at the hotel?" "I'd like that very much." Now rising to prepare for another day of teaching, Eliza found herself humming as she dressed. The children would be full of questions about the trial. She had no illusions about how thoroughly the town gossip mill operated, but she felt ready to face them. Ready to face anything, really, with Luke's love as her foundation. The school day proved exactly as anticipated. The older students peppered her with barely concealed curiosity until she finally addressed it head-on during the lunch break. "Yes, I testified yesterday. Yes, the men who attacked our stagecoach were found guilty. And yes, I'm fine. Now, can we please return our attention to American history?" Tommy Mackenzie raised his hand tentatively. "Miss Hart, my ma says you were real brave. Is that true?" Eliza felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "I did what needed to be done, Tommy. Sometimes being brave just means doing the right thing even when you're scared." "Were you scared?" "Terrified. But I had good people supporting me, and that made all the difference." The afternoon passed peacefully after that, the children settling into their lessons with renewed focus. Eliza dismissed them at 3 o'clock and was tidying the classroom when Martha appeared in the doorway, her expression troubled. "Eliza, honey, I need to talk to you about something." The seriousness in her tone made Eliza's stomach clench. "What's wrong?" Martha entered and closed the door behind her, lowering her voice even though they were alone. "My husband got word this morning from a colleague in Tucson. Seems Deacon Pierce has a brother. Name's Clayton Pierce, and he's got a reputation that makes Deacon look like a choir boy." Eliza sank into her desk chair, cold dread replacing the morning's warmth. "What kind of reputation?" "The violent kind. Clayton runs with a gang, bigger and meaner than the one Deacon had, and word is he's not happy about his brother being sentenced to 15 years. Martha's face was grave. "Sheriff Cole wanted you to know so you could be careful. Stay close to town, don't go anywhere alone, that sort of thing." "Do they think he'll come here?" "They don't know. Could be just talk. Could be Clayton's too smart to ride into a town where his brother just got convicted, but my husband's not taking chances. He's doubling patrols, and Luke's been assigned to keep a particular eye on you. The mention of Luke made Eliza's heart twist. Where is he now? Riding the perimeter, checking the approaches to town. He'll be back before sundown. Martha reached out and squeezed Eliza's hand. I don't want to scare you, but I'd rather you be cautious than caught off guard. After Martha left, Eliza sat alone in the quiet schoolroom and felt the fragile peace she'd found beginning to crack. Just when she thought the nightmare was over, just when she'd started to believe in safety and love and new beginnings, danger circled back around. She forced herself to finish her work, then locked up the schoolhouse and walked home through streets that suddenly felt less welcoming. Every shadow seemed to hold menace, every unfamiliar face a potential threat. By the time she reached her cottage, her nerves were strung tight as wire. Luke was waiting on her porch, and the relief that flooded through her was almost painful in its intensity. Martha told you, he said, reading her expression immediately. Yes. Eliza climbed the steps and let him pull her into his arms, pressing her face against his chest. Tell me the truth. How worried should I be? Honestly, I don't know. Clayton Pierce is dangerous, but he's also a survivor. Coming after you directly would bring down more law enforcement than he'd want to deal with. Luke's arms tightened around her. But I'm not taking any chances. I'll be staying close until we know more. You can't watch over me every second. You have other duties. Oh, those duties include protecting the people of this town. Your people of this town. He pulled back enough to look at her face. I'm sorry. I know you were just starting to feel safe. So were you, Eliza said softly, seeing the frustration and anger in his eyes. You wanted this to be over for me. I wanted a lot of things. His thumb traced her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. Still want them, still planning on them. Clayton Pierce doesn't change that. What if he comes? What if he tries to... She couldn't finish the thought. Then he'll have to go through me first, and I promise you, Eliza, that's not going to be easy for him. The steel in Luke's voice was absolute. Nothing and no one is going to hurt you again. Not while I'm breathing. They stood together in the fading light, holding each other, and Eliza tried to absorb his certainty into her own bones. She'd been through so much already. Surely the universe owed her some peace now. But the universe, she was learning, didn't deal in fairness. The next week passed in uneasy tension. Luke kept his word about staying close, walking her to and from the schoolhouse, checking in multiple times throughout the day, sleeping in the sheriff's office so he could respond quickly to any threat. The other deputies increased their patrols, and Sheriff Cole put out inquiries to law enforcement across the territory, trying to track Clayton Pierce's movements. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then, on Thursday evening, a cowboy rode into town with news that made everyone's blood run cold. Clayton Pierce and 5 men had been spotted 2 days' ride south, heading north, heading toward Redstone. The town erupted into controlled chaos. Sheriff Cole called an emergency meeting at the saloon, and every able-bodied man in Redstone showed up armed and grim-faced. Eliza watched from the doorway as Luke helped organize the defense, posting lookouts, establishing patrol routes, preparing the jail as a potential stronghold. We don't know for certain they're coming here, the sheriff told the assembled men, but we'd be fools not to prepare. If Clayton Pierce wants trouble, we'll give him more than he bargained for. A cheer went up, and Eliza felt simultaneously grateful for the town's solidarity and terrified of what that solidarity might cost. Luke found her after the meeting, his expression weary but determined. I need you to do something for me. Anything. Stay inside tomorrow. Cancel school, lock your doors, and don't open them for anyone but me or the sheriff. Can you do that? You think they'll come tomorrow? I think if they're 2 days out and riding hard, tomorrow's the most likely time. He gripped her shoulders gently. I can't do my job if I'm worried about you being exposed out at the schoolhouse. Please, Eliza, just this once, let me protect you the easy way. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she wouldn't hide, wouldn't let fear control her decisions. But the exhaustion in Luke's face, the desperate edge to his voice, made her reconsider. All right, I'll stay inside. Relief washed over his features. Thank you. That night, Eliza barely slept. She lay awake listening to every sound, the wind rattling the shutters, a dog barking in the distance, the periodic calls of the night watch patrolling the streets. Somewhere out there in the darkness, violent men were riding toward Redstone with revenge on their minds, and the man she loved would be standing between them and their goal. Dawn came gray and threatening, clouds piling up on the horizon like trouble made visible. Eliza dressed and made coffee with shaking hands, then settled at her window to watch the street. A few early risers moved about their business, but the town had a subdued quality, everyone bracing for what might come. Luke appeared at mid-morning, looking like he hadn't slept at all. She let him in and immediately put more coffee on the stove while he sank into a chair at her small table. "Anything?" she asked. "Nothing yet. Lookouts haven't spotted anything unusual." He scrubbed his hands over his face. "Could be they changed course. Could be our intelligence was wrong. Could be they're just taking their time." Eliza set coffee in front of him and settled in the opposite chair. "Have you eaten?" "Not hungry." "Luke?" She waited until he looked at her. "You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. Let me make you something." She prepared eggs and bacon while he drank his coffee in silence, and when she set the plate in front of him, he ate mechanically, clearly forcing himself to fuel his body even though his mind was elsewhere. "I keep thinking about my sister," he said suddenly, "how she had no one to protect her, how helpless she must have felt." His eyes met Eliza's, dark with old pain and new determination. "I can't let that happen again. Not to you. Not to anyone." "You're one man, Luke. If 6 riders come into this town looking for trouble, then I'll make sure I'm not the only one standing between them and innocent people." He reached across the table and took her hand. "But I need you to promise me something. If things go bad, if it looks like we can't hold them off, I need you to run. Go out the back, head for the rocks, hide until it's over." "I won't leave you." Eliza said, "No." She gripped his hand fiercely. "I won't hide while you risk your life for me. We face this together, whatever comes." Luke looked like he wanted to argue, but before he could speak, the sound of gunfire shattered the morning quiet. They both froze, eyes locked, and then Luke was on his feet, grabbing his rifle from where he'd leaned it by the door. "Stay here," he ordered. "Lock the door behind me and don't open it for anyone but me or the sheriff." "Luke, wait!" But he was already gone, running toward the sound of shots, and Eliza was left alone with her racing heart and her terror. She locked the door as instructed and ran to the window, pressing her face against the glass. Townspeople were scattering, parents grabbing children and rushing for cover. More shots rang out, and Eliza saw riders at the far end of the main street, 6 of them, exactly as reported, firing into the air and advancing slowly. Clayton Pierce rode at their center, and even from a distance, Eliza could see the family resemblance to Deacon. Same build, same predatory posture, same aura of casual cruelty. Luke and the other deputies were taking positions behind cover, water troughs, storefronts, the corner of the livery stable. Sheriff Cole stood in the middle of the street, hands near his guns but not drawn, projecting authority even in the face of overwhelming odds. "That's far enough, Clayton," the sheriff's voice carried clearly. "You got business in Redstone, state it peaceful or turn around." Clayton's laugh was harsh and mocking. "Oh, I got business all right, Sheriff. Got a brother sitting in your jail waiting transport to territorial prison. Thought I'd come have a word about that." "Your brother was convicted fair and square. He committed crimes. He's paying for them. That's all there is to it." "See, I disagree. Way I hear it, some lying Eastern bitch made up a story to get him locked up. Thought maybe I'd have a conversation with her about that. Set the record straight." Eliza's blood went cold. This was about her. These men had ridden into town guns blazing because of her testimony, because she dared to tell the truth about what Deacon had done. "Miss Hart told the truth," Sheriff Cole said firmly, "and you threatening her just proves what kind of men you and your brother are. Now you've got 2 choices. You can turn around right now and ride out, or you can face justice same as Deacon. Which is it going to be?" Clayton's response was to draw his gun and fire directly at the sheriff. Cole dove for cover as the bullet whined past his head, and suddenly the whole street erupted into chaos. The deputies returned fire, and Clayton's men scattered, taking cover behind their horses and returning shots with vicious accuracy. Glass shattered in storefronts, Bullets thudded into wood. Someone screamed. Eliza watched in horror as Luke traded shots with one of the outlaws, his movements precise and controlled even in the midst of chaos. He dropped one man with a clean shot, then had to duck as another bullet nearly took his hat off. She couldn't just stand here. Couldn't just watch while Luke and the others risked their lives. Eliza ran to her bedroom and pulled out the small revolver Martha had insisted she buy weeks ago, despite her protests that she'd never be able to use it. Martha had taught her to load it, to aim it, to squeeze the trigger slowly and steadily. At the time, Eliza had thought it was unnecessary paranoia. Now she blessed Martha's foresight. She checked that it was loaded, then returned to the front room just as something heavy slammed against her door. Once. Twice. On the third impact, the lock gave way and the door burst open. A man filled the doorway, one of Clayton's gang, young and wild-eyed and clearly sent to flush her out, while the others kept the deputies pinned down. He grinned when he saw her, showing gap teeth. "There you are, Missy. Boss wants a word." "Get out of my house," Eliza said, raising the revolver with both hands the way Martha had taught her. The outlaw's grin widened. "You ain't gonna shoot me. Pretty little thing, like you don't have the stomach for—" Eliza pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening in the small space, and her aim was terrible. The bullet went wide, embedding itself in the doorframe a foot to the left of the outlaw's head. But the shock of it, the sheer unexpectedness of this Eastern schoolteacher actually firing at him, made the man stumble backward. "The next one won't miss," Eliza lied, her voice shaking but firm. "Get away from my door." The outlaw's face twisted with rage, and he started to raise his own gun. Eliza was squeezing the trigger again when a shot cracked from behind the man, and he dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Luke stood in the street, smoke curling from his rifle barrel, his face a mask of fury and fear. "Eliza, get back from the door!" She obeyed instinctively, stumbling backward just as another of Clayton's men appeared, firing wildly. Luke returned fire with deadly precision, and that man fell too. The gunfight continued around them, but Luke was moving now, running toward Eliza's cottage, even as bullets kicked up dust at his feet. He dove through the doorway and slammed what was left of the broken door shut behind him. "Are you hurt?" He grabbed her shoulders, his eyes wild as they scanned her for injuries. "Did he touch you?" "No, I'm fine, Luke. You shouldn't have. You left your position. I heard the shot from inside your house and nothing else mattered." He pulled her against him hard, his heart hammering against her cheek. "When I thought that I might have been too late." Another volley of shots interrupted him, closer now. Through the broken door, Eliza could see the street where Sheriff Cole and the deputies were making a fighting retreat toward the jail, trying to draw Clayton's men away from the residential area. "We need to move," Luke said grimly. "This cottage is too exposed. Can you run?" "Yes." "Stay behind me. We're going for the schoolhouse. Stone walls, better cover, and I've got extra ammunition stored there. Ready?" Eliza nodded, clutching her revolver, and Luke kicked open what remained of the door. They burst out into the chaos of the street, Luke's rifle barking as he provided covering fire. Eliza ran as she'd never run before, her skirts tangling around her legs, her lungs burning. A bullet whined past her ear and she stumbled. Luke's arm caught her, kept her upright, kept her moving. They reached the schoolhouse, and Luke kicked in the door, shoving Eliza inside before turning to fire at the outlaws pursuing them. He dropped one more man before ducking inside and barricading the door with the heavy teacher's desk. "Windows!" he barked. "Stay below them!" Eliza dropped to the floor, crawling to the window nearest her desk. Outside, she could see the remaining outlaws, Clayton and two others, regrouping near the livery stable. The deputies were returning fire from the jail, but the outlaws had them pinned down. "They're trying to flank the jail," Luke muttered, checking his ammunition. "If they get behind Cole and the others—" He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Eliza understood the implications. "What can we do?" Luke looked at her, and she saw the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of terrible options. "I can't leave you here alone, but I can't let them massacre the sheriff and deputies either. So we go together." "Eliza, no. You need someone to watch your back, someone who can reload while you fire. I can do that." She crawled to where he crouched and met his eyes steadily. "You taught me I was stronger than I thought. Now let me prove it." For a long moment, Luke just stared at her. Then, slowly, he nodded. "All right, But you follow my orders exactly. Understand? No heroics, no risks. You do what I say when I say it. I understand. He pulled her to him and kissed her hard and quick. I love you. Whatever happens out there, remember that. I love you too, which is why we're both going to survive this. Luke moved to the back door of the schoolhouse, the one that faced away from the main street and toward the rocks beyond town. He eased it open and scanned the area, then gestured for Eliza to follow. They slipped out into the harsh sunlight, using the school building as cover as they circled toward the jail. Gunfire still echoed from the main street, but here behind the buildings, it was eerily quiet. Luke moved with the fluid caution of a hunting cat, and Eliza followed as silently as she could manage. They were halfway to the jail when a voice stopped them cold. Well, well, the deputy and his whore. Clayton Pierce stepped out from behind the general store, gun already drawn and pointed directly at Luke's chest. His face was twisted with hatred and something like satisfaction. You killed 3 of my men, lawman. That's going to cost you. Luke shifted slightly, positioning himself between Clayton and Eliza. Let her go. This is between you and me. Nah, I don't think so. See, this is about family, about loyalty. My brother's going to prison because of her lies. Clayton's gun swung toward Eliza. She needs to learn there's consequences to what she done. She told the truth. Your brother assaulted her, and he's paying for it. You want to be angry at him for being stupid enough to get caught. Shut your mouth. Clayton's hand tightened on his gun. You don't talk about my blood. You don't. Luke moved with shocking speed, his rifle coming up even as he pushed Eliza hard to the side. Both guns fired simultaneously. Clayton's bullet caught Luke high in the shoulder, spinning him around. Luke's shot took Clayton in the chest. The outlaw staggered backward, surprise blooming on his face, and collapsed against the wall of the general store. His gun clattered to the dirt. Luke! Eliza scrambled to where he'd fallen, her hands immediately going to the spreading blood stain on his shoulder. Oh, no, no, no! I'm all right, he gritted out, though his face had gone pale. Check Clayton. Make sure he's... But Clayton wasn't moving. Eliza could see from where she knelt that his eyes were vacant, fixed on nothing, dead before he hit the ground. The gunfire from the main street had stopped. In the sudden quiet, Sheriff Cole's voice rang out. Clayton, your boys are down or surrendered. It's over. Luke tried to sit up and immediately went gray with pain. Eliza pressed her hands against his wound, trying to staunch the bleeding even as panic clawed at her throat. Someone help, she screamed. The deputy's been shot. Footsteps pounded toward them, and suddenly Sheriff Cole was there, taking in the scene with practiced eyes. How bad? He asked Eliza. I don't know. There's so much blood. Shoulder wound, Luke managed. Hurts like hell, but I don't think it hit anything vital. Let's get him to Doc Morrison. The sheriff helped Luke to his feet, supporting most of his weight. Miss Hart, you did good. Real good. Now let's get this fool patched up before his stubbornness kills him. The next hours passed in a blur of fear and waiting. Doc Morrison, the town's aging physician, worked on Luke's shoulder while Eliza paced the outer room of his office, her dress still splattered with blood, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Martha arrived and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders despite the warmth of the day. Sarah brought tea that Eliza couldn't drink. The sheriff came and went, giving updates. All of Clayton's men were either dead or in custody. No townspeople killed, though several were wounded. The jail was secure. Finally, after what felt like years, Doc Morrison emerged from the back room, wiping his hands on a towel. He'll live. Bullet went clean through, missed the bone, and major vessels. He'll be sore for a few weeks, but he should heal up fine. The doctor's stern expression softened slightly. He's asking for you, Miss Hart. Try not to agitate him too much. Eliza didn't remember crossing the room, only found herself suddenly at Luke's bedside. He lay propped against pillows, his shoulder heavily bandaged, his face still pale, but his eyes clear and warm when they found hers. Hey, he said softly. Hey, yourself. Eliza sank into the chair beside the bed and took his uninjured hand in both of hers. You scared me half to death. Sorry about that. Wasn't exactly my plan. He squeezed her fingers weakly. Clayton? Dead. So are 2 of his men. The others surrendered. She closed her eyes against the sudden sting of tears. It's really over. This time, it's really over. Yeah. Luke's thumb traced circles on her palm. We're safe now. All of us. You got shot protecting me. Worth it. Luke, worth it, he repeated firmly. Every time, Eliza. I'd take 100 bullets before I'd let anyone hurt you. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. I can't lose you. I just found you. I can't. You're not losing me. He tugged her hand gently, pulling her down until she was half draped across his chest, careful of his injured shoulder. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. We survived, Eliza, both of us, together. She let herself cry then, all the terror and relief and love pouring out in shaking sobs while Luke held her with his good arm and murmured reassurances into her hair. Outside, Redstone was cleaning up after the violence, counting its wounded and burying its dead. But here, in this quiet room, two people who'd been through hell and found each other on the other side held tight and promised themselves to forever. Doc Morrison insisted on keeping Luke overnight for observation, which meant Eliza spent that night in the chair beside his bed, dozing fitfully and waking at every small sound. Each time she opened her eyes, she found Luke watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. You should go home, he murmured during one of these moments, well past midnight. Get some real sleep. I'm fine right here. Eliza, I'm not leaving you. She shifted in the chair, trying to find a more comfortable position. So you might as well stop arguing and rest. A smile ghosted across his face. Stubborn woman. You're one to talk. Morning came with pale light filtering through the doctor's curtains and the sound of the town stirring to life outside. Eliza woke with a crick in her neck and found Luke already awake, moving his injured shoulder experimentally and wincing at the result. How does it feel? She asked. Like I got shot. But his tone was wry rather than complaining. Doc says I can go home today as long as I promise to take it easy. Which you will. Which I will, he agreed, though the look in his eyes suggested his definition of taking it easy might differ from the doctor's. Sheriff Cole arrived mid-morning with fresh clothes for Luke and news from the town. The wounded were all recovering, the dead had been buried, and the surviving members of Clayton's gang were secured in the jail, awaiting transport to Territorial Prison. Town Council wants to hold a special meeting tonight, the sheriff told them. Lots of folks want to express their gratitude, especially to you two. You saved lives yesterday. We were just doing what needed doing, Luke said. Maybe so, but that doesn't make it less worthy of recognition. Cole's expression turned serious. There's also the matter of your position, Luke. With you injured, I'm going to need someone to help carry the load until you're healed up. Was thinking of making it permanent, hiring a second deputy. Town's growing, and yesterday proved we need more law enforcement. Good idea, Luke agreed. You have someone in mind? Few candidates. We can discuss it once you're back on your feet. The sheriff's eyes shifted to Eliza, and something like amusement crossed his face. Miss Hart, I expect you'll want to get cleaned up before tonight's meeting. Martha's been by your cottage this morning, got the door fixed and tidied up the mess from yesterday. Eliza felt a rush of gratitude. Please thank her for me? You can thank her yourself tonight. She'll be at the meeting along with half the town. After the sheriff left, Doc Morrison gave Luke a final examination and pronounced him fit to leave with strict instructions about rest, clean bandages, and no heavy lifting for at least 3 weeks. And no heroics, the doctor added sternly. You hear shooting? You let someone else handle it for once. Yes, sir, Luke said with such exaggerated meekness that Eliza had to hide a smile. They walked slowly back to Eliza's cottage through streets that showed signs of yesterday's violence. Bullet holes in storefronts, broken windows being replaced, blood stains in the dust that someone was trying to scrub away. But there was also laughter, children playing, women hanging laundry, life asserting itself with stubborn determination. Inside the cottage, Eliza saw that Martha had indeed worked miracles. The broken furniture had been removed, the floors cleaned, fresh curtains hung at the windows. The only sign of yesterday's intrusion was the new door, its wood still pale and unweathered. I need to thank her properly, Eliza said, looking around with wonder. She'll say you already did by standing up to those men. Luke lowered himself carefully into a chair. The whole town's talking about how you fired at that outlaw. I think you terrified him more than any of the deputies did. My aim was terrible. Your courage wasn't. He held out his good hand. Come here. Eliza went to him, letting him pull her down to perch on his knee. She was careful of his injured shoulder, but he wrapped his arm around her waist and held her close. I've been thinking, he said quietly, about what happens next. For us. Eliza's heart began to beat faster. What do you mean? I mean that life's too short and too uncertain to waste time dancing around what we both want. His eyes searched hers. I love you, Eliza. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and go to sleep with you in my arms every night. I want to watch you teach those children and come home to you after patrol and grow old together in this town we're both learning to love. Tears pricked Eliza's eyes. Luke, I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few months. But when I was lying there bleeding yesterday, all I could think was how much I'd regret it if I died without asking you to marry me. He cupped her face with his free hand. So I'm asking now. Eliza Hart, will you be my wife? The answer came without hesitation, rising from the deepest part of her heart. Yes. Yes. Absolutely yes. Luke's face transformed with joy, and he kissed her with such fierce tenderness that Eliza felt it all the way to her soul. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I don't have a ring yet. Didn't exactly plan this moment. I don't need a ring. I just need you. You'll get both, he promised. Ring, wedding, everything you deserve. They sat together in the quiet cottage, holding each other, letting the magnitude of the commitment they'd just made settle over them like a blessing. Outside, Redstone continued its daily business, unaware that two of its residents had just changed their lives forever. That evening, the entire town gathered at the largest venue available, the church, its pews packed to capacity with standing room only at the back. Eliza sat in the front row with Martha on one side and Luke on the other, his injured arm in a sling but his back straight and proud. Mayor Thompson, a portly man with impressive mutton chops, stood at the pulpit and called the meeting to order. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here tonight to acknowledge the events of yesterday and to honor those who protected our town. As you all know, we were attacked by a gang of outlaws seeking revenge. Thanks to the bravery of our sheriff, our deputies, and several citizens, that attack was repelled with minimal loss of life. Applause filled the church, and the mayor waited for it to subside before continuing. Sheriff Cole, would you please stand? The sheriff rose, looking uncomfortable with the attention, and received another round of applause. Deputy Mercer, despite being wounded in the line of duty, please stand as well. Luke stood, and the applause grew louder. Eliza saw pride and affection in the faces around her. This town had claimed Luke as one of their own, and they weren't letting him forget it. And finally, Miss Eliza Hart, our school teacher, who showed remarkable courage in defending herself and assisting Deputy Mercer. Please stand, ma'am. Eliza rose on shaking legs, overwhelmed by the sound of the entire town applauding her. She caught Sarah's eye across the room and saw tears on the other woman's face. Grace Peterson was clapping with fierce approval. Even the children from her class were cheering. These three individuals, the mayor continued when the noise died down, represent the best of what Redstone can be: courage, determination, and willingness to stand together against those who would harm us. The town council has voted to award each of them a commendation and our deepest gratitude. The sheriff received a plaque. Luke was given another, which he accepted with quiet grace. And when Eliza was called forward, the mayor pressed a small velvet box into her hands. With appreciation from the women of Redstone, he said quietly, open it later. Dazed, Eliza returned to her seat. The meeting continued with other business, discussion of repairs, proposals for improving the town's defenses, a vote to hire additional law enforcement, but Eliza barely heard any of it. She was too aware of Luke beside her, his presence solid and real and permanent. When the meeting finally adjourned, people swarmed around them with thanks and congratulations. It took nearly an hour to work their way out of the church, and by the time they emerged into the cool evening air, Eliza was exhausted. Luke seemed to sense it. Want to get out of here? Go somewhere quiet? Please. They walked to the edge of town to the same trail that led up into the rocks where Luke had first kissed her. But instead of climbing, they sat on a boulder near the base and looked back at redstone spread out below them, lamplight beginning to glow in windows as families settled in for the night. Open your gift, Luke said, gesturing to the velvet box she still clutched. Eliza opened it and gasped. Inside was a delicate gold locket on a fine chain, and when she opened the locket, she found a tiny photograph of the schoolhouse on one side and an empty space on the other. The women took up a collection, Luke explained. Martha organized it. The empty side is for a photograph of your family or whoever you want to carry close to your heart. Eliza's vision blurred with tears. It's beautiful. Will you help me put it on? Luke fastened the chain around her neck with his good hand, his fingers gentle against her skin. The locket settled just above her heart, warm from his touch. There's something I need to tell you, Eliza said, turning to face him. About what happened with Deacon Pierce and Clayton and all of it. You don't have to talk about that if you don't want to. I do, though, because I need you to understand something. She took his hand in both of hers. When Deacon kissed me, he thought he was taking something from me. My innocence, my sense of safety, my belief that the world could be good. And for a while, I thought he had succeeded. I thought I was broken, that some essential part of me had been destroyed. Luke started to protest, but she squeezed his hand, asking him to listen. But then you showed me I was wrong. You taught me that what he took wasn't mine to begin with. It was his violence, his cruelty, his sickness. What was mine was the choice of who to trust, who to love, who to give myself to freely and without fear. She reached up to touch his face. You gave me back that choice, Luke. Not by pretending the bad thing didn't happen, but by showing me what the good thing could be. Eliza, let me finish. What I'm trying to say is that I'm not afraid anymore. Not of intimacy, not of trust, not of building a life with someone. Because you showed me what it means when a man truly loves a woman. It's not about taking, it's about giving. Not about power, but about partnership. And I want to spend the rest of my life learning that with you. Luke pulled her into his arms, mindful of his injured shoulder, but holding her as close as he could manage. You're the bravest person I've ever met. You know that. I'm really not. I'm just someone who was lucky enough to find a good man when I needed one most. We found each other, Luke corrected, and I'm not letting go. They sat together as the stars came out overhead, talking quietly about their future. They decided to marry in a month, giving Luke time to heal and Eliza time to finish preparing her students for the territorial examinations. They talked about where they'd live, Luke's small house near the sheriff's office, or Eliza's cottage, and agreed to combine households in whichever space made the most sense. I'll have to keep teaching, Eliza said. The town needs a school teacher, and I love the work. I wouldn't have it any other way. You were born to teach, Eliza. I saw it the first time I watched you with those kids. And you'll stay on as deputy? Long as the town needs me. Though I've been thinking maybe eventually I'd like to try ranching, get a small spread, raise some cattle, have a place to come home to that's truly ours. I'd like that. Eliza imagined it. A house in the desert, children running in the yard, Luke coming home from work to find her waiting. A life built from nothing but love and determination and the willingness to believe in second chances. I'd like that very much. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Martha took charge of wedding planning with the enthusiasm of a general organizing a campaign. The women of Redstone descended on Eliza with offers of help, advice, and enough fabric samples to upholster every chair in the territory. Luke's shoulder healed slowly but surely, and by the third week he was back on light duty, mostly paperwork and training the new Deputy Sheriff Cole had hired. A young man named Tom Bradley from New Mexico with a steady eye and a respectful manner. School continued, and Eliza found joy in watching her students grow and learn. The territorial examinations came and went, and when the results arrived showing that Redstone students had scored higher than any previous year, the town celebrated with almost as much enthusiasm as they'd shown after the gunfight. You're a miracle worker, Sarah told her, hugging her tightly. My boys actually enjoy reading now. I never thought I'd see the day. They just needed someone to show them it could be fun, Eliza demurred, but privately, she glowed with pride and satisfaction. She'd found her calling, her purpose, her place in this rough frontier town that had become home. The wedding was planned for the first Saturday in December, when the worst of the summer heat had passed, but winter's chill hadn't yet arrived. The church was decorated with wildflowers and ribbons, and it seemed like every person in Redstone and half the surrounding territory crowded into the pews to witness the marriage of their schoolteacher and their deputy. Eliza stood in the small room behind the church, looking at herself in the borrowed mirror and barely recognizing the woman staring back. Martha had helped her into a cream-colored dress, simple but elegant, with lace at the collar and cuffs, and pinned her hair up in a style that was both sophisticated and romantic. The locket Luke had given her hung around her neck, and she'd placed a small photograph of him in the empty space so she'd always carry him close to her heart. "You look beautiful," Martha said, her eyes bright with tears. "Luke's going to forget how to breathe when he sees you." "I'm so nervous," Eliza confessed. "My hands won't stop shaking." "That's normal." "But honey, there's nothing to be nervous about. You love him, he loves you, and the rest is just ceremony." Sarah appeared in the doorway. "It's time. Everyone's ready." Eliza took a deep breath and let Martha and Sarah lead her to the church entrance. Through the open doors she could see the crowded pews, the flowers, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. And at the front, waiting beside the minister with Sheriff Cole at his side as best man, stood Luke. He was cleaned up and formal in a dark suit she'd never seen him wear, his hair neatly combed, his injured arm finally free of its sling. But it was his expression that made Eliza's breath catch, the wonder and love and absolute certainty in his eyes, as he watched her walk down the aisle toward him. The ceremony passed in a blur of emotion. Eliza heard herself speak her vows, heard Luke's voice steady and sure as he promised to love and cherish her. She felt the ring slide onto her finger, a simple gold band he'd ordered from a jeweler in Tucson, and saw the matching one she placed on his hand. And then the minister was pronouncing them husband and wife, and Luke was kissing her in front of the entire town, kissing her with such tender passion that someone in the back whistled and everyone laughed. "I love you, Mrs. Mercer," Luke whispered against her lips. "I love you too," Eliza whispered back, and felt the last piece of fear that had been lodged in her heart since that terrible day on the stagecoach finally dissolve completely. The reception was held in the same barn where the town social had been, and it seemed like half the territory had contributed food and drink. There was dancing and toasting and so much joy that Eliza felt drunk on it without touching a drop of alcohol. Luke danced with her again and again, holding her close and spinning her around the floor while their friends and neighbors cheered. Sheriff Cole gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. Martha presented them with a quilt she and the other women had made, each square embroidered with symbols of their journey, a stagecoach, a schoolhouse, a deputy's star, a heart. As the sun set and the lamps were lit, Eliza stood in Luke's arms and looked around at the community that had embraced her, protected her, and helped her heal. She thought about how far she'd come from the terrified woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach with her life in ruins. "What are you thinking?" Luke asked, swaying with her to the music. "I'm thinking about first kisses," she said. "How mine was stolen in fear, but every kiss after has been given in love. How what began as the worst moment of my life led me to the best thing that ever happened to me." "You're the best thing that ever happened to me," Luke said seriously. "I want you to know that. I want you to always know that." "I do know it. Just like I know we're going to have a beautiful life together." "Damn right we are." He kissed her forehead. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Mercer?" "More than ready." They slipped away from the celebration amid cheers and well-wishes and walked hand in hand through the quiet streets of Redstone to the house that was now theirs, Luke's place, which Eliza had moved into the week before. It was small but sturdy, with a bedroom, a main room, and a kitchen, and Eliza had already begun making it feel like home with curtains and books and small touches of beauty. Inside, Luke lit the lamps while Eliza removed her shoes and unpinned her hair, letting it fall around her shoulders. When she turned, she found him watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. "Come here," he said softly. She went to him, and he pulled her close, his hands gentle as they had always been, asking permission with every touch. They kissed slowly, deeply, taking their time, and when Luke finally led her to their bedroom, Eliza felt no fear at all. What followed was tender and beautiful and sometimes awkward. They were both learning each other, discovering what brought pleasure and what made them laugh. But it was theirs, freely chosen and joyfully shared. And when they finally lay tangled together in the darkness, Eliza felt a completeness she'd never known was possible. "I'm so glad I got on that stagecoach," she whispered. "Even though it was terrifying, even though terrible things happened, I'm glad. Because it brought me here. To you." I'm glad too," Luke said, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "Though I wish I could have spared you the pain. The pain made me who I am, and who I am is someone strong enough to love you without fear, brave enough to build this life, certain enough to believe in forever." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and Eliza dreamed of the future they would build together, children learning their letters in her classroom, horses grazing in fields they'd plant, gray hair and wrinkled hands still intertwined after decades of love. The years proved her dreams prophetic. Eliza taught in Redstone's schoolhouse for another 30 years, educating generations of children and becoming one of the most beloved figures in the town's history. Luke served as deputy and then sheriff, keeping the peace with quiet competence and earning the respect of everyone who knew him. They bought their ranch 5 years after marrying, a modest spread with good water and better views, and built a house there where they raised 3 children. 2 boys who had their father's steady eyes and their mother's love of learning, and a daughter who was fierce and fearless and determined to become a doctor despite everyone telling her women didn't do such things. Redstone grew and prospered, transforming from a rough frontier town into a thriving community with schools and churches and businesses. The railroad came through when Luke was 45, bringing new people and new possibilities. But through all the changes, the Mercers remained a constant, pillars of the community, examples of what love and courage could build. On their 30th anniversary, Luke and Eliza sat on the porch of their ranch house watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of fire and gold. Their children were grown and scattered, the boys running ranches of their own, their daughter studying medicine in San Francisco. But the house still felt full of love and memory. "Do you ever think about that day?" Eliza asked, her hand clasped in Luke's. "The stagecoach? Sometimes," Luke admitted, "but not the way I used to. Now when I think about it, I mostly remember being grateful." "Grateful?" "That I was there, that I could help you, that it led to this." He gestured at the life spread out before them, the ranch, the children's abandoned toys still scattered in the yard, the home they'd built with their own hands and hearts. All of this came from that terrible moment. Seems like the universe knew what it was doing after all. Eliza leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the absolute certainty of his presence in her life. "My first kiss was given in fear," she said quietly. "But every kiss after was chosen, cherished, free." "And how many kisses has it been now, do you suppose?" "Thousands. Tens of thousands, probably." "Not enough," Luke said, tilting her face up to his. "Never enough." He kissed her as the sun sank below the horizon, as gentle and careful as that first deliberate kiss on the rocks above Redstone. And Eliza kissed him back with 3 decades of love and trust and absolute certainty that this patient, passionate, enduring love was worth every moment of fear that had come before it. What began in terror had ended in love, and stayed that way through all the years that followed, through children and grandchildren, through the aging of their bodies and the deepening of their souls. And when they were very old and their time together was drawing to its natural close, Eliza would look back on her life and know with perfect clarity that she had been blessed beyond measure. Not because terrible things hadn't happened to her, they had, but because she'd found the courage to survive them, the strength to heal from them, and the wisdom to recognize love when it offered itself with patient, gentle hands. Her first kiss was stolen by a cruel man on a dusty road, but every kiss after belonged to her and the good man who'd taught her what love truly meant, that it was offered, not taken, given, not stolen, chosen freely and cherished endlessly. And in the end, that made all the difference.